The Howard University auditorium fell silent as Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, her eyes locked on Candace Owens across the stage. The conservative commentator had just finished a fiery tirade about crime statistics, her voice still echoing through the packed venue. But something in Crockett's calm demeanor made the audience hold its breath. She slowly opened a manila folder on her desk, pulled out a single document, and began reading in a measured tone that cut through the tension like a blade. Ms. Owens, in 2007, you filed a lawsuit claiming you experienced, and I quote, systematic racial discrimination that created a hostile educational environment. The color drained from Owens' face as hundreds of phones rose to capture what would become the most devastating political takedown of the year. The confrontation that would shake political discourse across America began at what should have been a routine political forum on criminal justice reform. Jasmine Crockett, the rising Democratic congresswoman from Texas, had built her reputation as a fierce advocate for civil rights, carrying her experience as a civil rights attorney into the halls of Congress, where she'd become known for her surgical precision in dismantling opposing arguments. Candace Owens, the conservative firebrand who'd risen to prominence through her rejection of what she called victim mentality, had amassed millions of followers by challenging conventional narratives about race in America. The Howard University Forum promised to be contentious, but no one anticipated the complete unraveling that would unfold on that stage, transforming both women's political trajectories forever. The evening started with typical political theater. Owens had arrived early, working the room with her characteristic confidence, shaking hands with skeptical students and assuring them she was there for honest dialogue. Crockett entered quietly, taking her seat without fanfare, arranging papers on her desk while Owens commanded attention with her opening remarks. The conservative commentator launched into familiar territory, dismissing systemic racism as a myth perpetuated by Democrats to maintain political power. She cited statistics about black-on-black crime, challenged the narrative of police brutality, and accused progressive politicians of keeping black Americans dependent on government assistance. The audience shifted uncomfortably as Owens' voice rose, her hands gesturing dramatically as she declared, "The real racism in America today comes from those who tell black people they're perpetual victims." Crockett remained silent during this initial barrage, occasionally jotting notes, her expression giving nothing away. Students in the audience began whispering, wondering if the congresswoman would respond or if Owens would dominate the entire forum. Then Owens made her critical mistake. Turning directly to Crockett, she pointed an accusatory finger and said, "Representative Crockett represents everything wrong with Democratic leadership. She sells false promises of systemic change while doing nothing but performative politics. Name one piece of legislation you've passed that actually helped the black community instead of just generating headlines." The moderator started to intervene, but Crockett raised her hand slightly, indicating she would respond. She stood slowly, walked to the podium, and began speaking in a tone so controlled it seemed to lower the room's temperature. "Ms. Owens, before we discuss my legislative record, which includes 3 bills on criminal justice reform currently in committee, I'd like to clarify something. You've built an entire career on telling black Americans that racism doesn't exist, that we're imagining our experiences, that we're lying about discrimination. Is that correct?" Owens nodded defiantly, starting to interject, but Crockett continued, without pause. "Then I'm confused, because I have here a legal document filed in Stanford Superior Court where you claimed you received threatening voicemails referring to you by racial slurs, where you stated that the harassment was racially motivated, where your attorney argued that the school's failure to protect you from racial discrimination caused you emotional distress requiring therapy." The audience gasped as Crockett held up the document, its official seal visible even from the back rows. Owens' mouth opened and closed, no words emerging. Crockett walked closer to center stage, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor in the sudden silence. "In this lawsuit, Ms. Owens, you sought $75,000 in damages for the racial discrimination you experienced. You won that lawsuit. The NAACP helped you. So my question is simple. Were you lying then or are you lying now?" The trap had been set perfectly, and Owens had walked directly into it. She attempted to deflect, her voice losing its earlier confidence as she stammered about context and different circumstances. But Crockett pressed forward relentlessly, reading directly from Owens' own deposition. "You testified under oath that racism had profoundly impacted your education and mental health. You said, and I quote, 'The racial animus I experienced has forever changed how I view institutional settings and my place within them.' The Congresswoman paused, letting the words hang in the air before continuing. Those are powerful words, Ms. Owens. The kind of words you now mock when other Black Americans say them. Owens tried to regain her footing by attacking Crockett's funding sources, suggesting she was bought and paid for by George Soros and other liberal donors. It was a desperate move, and Crockett was ready for it. Without missing a beat, she pulled out another set of documents. Since we're discussing funding, let's be transparent. According to FEC filings, your organization Blexit received substantial donations from groups that have actively supported voter suppression legislation in 13 states. She turned to the audience. These same groups funded robocalls in predominantly Black neighborhoods, giving false information about polling locations in 2020. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs as Crockett displayed the evidence on the large screen behind them. Financial records, email chains, and donation receipts painted a damning picture. Owens attempted to interrupt multiple times, her voice rising to near shouting levels, but Crockett maintained her composure with devastating effectiveness. Your volume doesn't change the facts, Ms. Owens, she said quietly, the microphone carrying her words clearly throughout the auditorium. You took money from people actively working to suppress the Black vote while claiming to be a voice for Black empowerment. That's not just hypocrisy, it's betrayal. The moderator attempted to restore order, but the damage was accelerating. Crockett had shifted into what political observers would later call one of the most methodical destructions of a political figure ever captured on camera. She presented screenshot after screenshot of Owens' deleted tweets, showing how her positions had conveniently shifted based on who was paying her at the time. When she worked for an anti-Trump publication, Owens had called him dangerous to democracy. When conservative money started flowing, she became his most vocal Black supporter. Crockett read each tweet aloud, her voice never wavering, never showing anger, just presenting facts with surgical precision. Students in the audience began standing, some applauding, others simply watching in stunned silence as Owens seemed to physically shrink on stage. Her usual quick wit and sharp comebacks had abandoned her completely. When she tried to pivot to attacking Black Lives Matter, Crockett was ready with statistics about police reform legislation, consent decrees that had reduced police violence, and specific cases where activism had led to justice for victims' families. Every talking point Owens attempted to deploy was met with data, documents, and receipts that Crockett had clearly been preparing for months. The moment that would go truly viral came when Crockett moved to her final argument. She walked to the edge of the stage, looking directly at the audience rather than at Owens. What we've witnessed tonight isn't just about Ms. Owens. It's about a disturbing trend in our political discourse where people monetize the pain of marginalized communities. They tell us our experiences aren't real while profiting from our struggles. They claim to be our voice while taking money from those who want us silenced. She turned back to Owens, who was gripping the edges of her podium. You once knew what discrimination felt like. You once fought against it. Somewhere along the way, you decided that denying other people's pain was more profitable than acknowledging it. That's not strength, Ms. Owens. That's the ultimate weakness. The Congresswoman then delivered what political commentators would later call the most devastating closing argument in modern political debate history. You've accused me of performative politics, but what's more performative than changing your entire worldview based on who's writing the checks? You've called me ineffective, but I've never had to betray my own lived experiences for a platform. You say I'm selling false promises, but at least I'm not selling my soul. She gathered her papers, preparing to return to her seat, then stopped and delivered the final blow. You know what the saddest part is, Ms. Owens? That teenage girl who sued her school for racial discrimination, who fought for justice, who refused to be silenced, she would be ashamed of who you've become. The auditorium exploded. Students leaped to their feet, some cheering, others simply staring in shock at what they had witnessed. Owens stood frozen for a moment, her face cycling through expressions of rage, humiliation, and something that looked almost like grief. Then, without warning, she ripped off her microphone and stormed off the stage, her heels echoing in the chaos. The moderator called after her, but she was already pushing through the exit doors, leaving behind a stunned audience and a career in ruins. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation were spreading across social media like wildfire. The hashtag Crockett Destroys Owens began trending nationally before the forum had even officially ended. Political commentators across the spectrum struggled to process what they had witnessed. Even conservative pundits who typically defended Owens found themselves unable to spin the devastation they had watched unfold. The receipts were too damning, the hypocrisy too blatant, the takedown too complete. Major news networks interrupted their regular programming to air segments of the confrontation. CNN's Van Jones called it the most thorough dismantling of a political figure I've seen in 20 years of covering politics. Even Fox News, typically supportive of Owens, could only manage weak deflections about Crockett's ambush tactics while acknowledging the damage was severe. The Washington Post's fact-checkers confirmed every document Crockett had presented was authentic. The New York Times published a lengthy piece examining how Crockett had spent months preparing for this moment, gathering evidence, and waiting for the perfect opportunity to expose what they called the profitable paradox of Candace Owens. By morning, the video had been viewed over 50 million times across various platforms. Owens' social media followers were dropping by the thousands. Several of her scheduled speaking engagements were quietly canceled. Corporate sponsors began distancing themselves from her brand. Meanwhile, Crockett's congressional office was flooded with calls of support. Fellow Democrats praised her for exposing what they called the grift of performative conservatism. Even some Republicans privately admitted she had exposed uncomfortable truths about how political commentary had become divorced from authentic belief. The aftermath extended far beyond the immediate political implications. The confrontation sparked a national conversation about authenticity in political discourse, the monetization of racial politics, and the price of selling out one's own experiences for profit and platform. Universities began using the video in political science and debate classes as an example of effective argumentation and the importance of opposition research. Young activists studied Crockett's technique of maintaining composure while delivering devastating facts, recognizing it as a masterclass in political combat. In the weeks that followed, Owens attempted various strategies to rehabilitate her image. She released a video response that was widely mocked for its desperate deflections. She tried to claim the lawsuit documents were taken out of context, but legal experts confirmed they meant exactly what Crockett had said they meant. She accused Crockett of playing gotcha politics, but the public had seen something deeper, a moment when performative politics met authentic conviction and authenticity won decisively.